everyone. Welcome and warm greetings to all who's tuned in today for the Financial Inclusion Data Working Group Technical Webinar. My name is Tati, and I am the Policy Analyst in the AFI Policy Programs and Regional Initiatives Unit, and will be supporting today's webinar with my colleague, Luis Trevino, the Senior Policy Manager of the Financial Inclusion Data Working Group, who will be today's moderator. I will now hand over the floor to our moderator, Mr. Luis Trevino. Luis, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tati. Dear FIDWG members, dear partners, participants, thank you so much for joining today for this Financial Inclusion Data Working Group webinar. Today we will have the second part of the revamping the demand side survey. That's the second part of the webinar we had last week. And today we will be focusing on the sustainable tools for collecting data and other different complementary alternatives for the demand side surveys. Before starting, please let me acknowledge our guest speakers today and share with them a very short biography. First, let me introduce you to Mrs. Isabel Carboni from Senfree Insight to Impact. Isabel leads the Insight to Impact's measurement work, including the financial needs measurement framework, using transactional data and demand-side surveys to draw out insights and emergent indicators for public policy and financial inclusion. Isabel joined Senfree with 20 years of experience in international development in Africa and Asia. Previously, she was the Global Technical Director for Evaluation and Impact Reporting for World Vision International, where she developed a global indicator framework, surveys, and mobile data collection methodology for measuring and reporting on child well-being. Isabel, welcome. We also will have the honor to have Mrs. Shirley Geoffreys from Finmark Trust Insight to Impact. Shirley is a data and survey specialist in Finmark Trust Insight to Impact facility. Shirley is part of the Insight to Impact team who have developed mixed methodological research to provide representative surveys at a sustainable cost. Shirley's primary focus is on mobile survey development for financial inclusion. Prior to joining Finmark Trust, Shirley gained extensive experience at Kantar, working as an account director in client services and as innovation partner. As an account director, Shirley managed the accounts of key clients in finance, service, public affairs, and technology sectors. Her role as an innovation partner saw her take responsibility for the development of a mobile research offer for Kantar TNS. Welcome, Shirley. We are also very lucky to have the presence of 3 regulators from Rwanda and some additional team members from Finmark Trust that will be also supporting the discussion for this. First, let me introduce you from I2I Finmark Trust. We also joined the conversation Mr. Grant Robertson. Grant is I2I Head of Survey and GIS Data for Financial Inclusion. Grant has over 25 years of experience in researching human behavior. His interests include research methodology, statistics, data collection, consumer insights, data and behavioral science. And Grant has a master's degree in research psychology from the University of Port Elizabeth. Welcome, Grant. We have from Finmark Trust, Bobby Berkowitz. He is the demand and survey specialist. And he has been in the previous sessions in the Financial Inclusion Data Working Group sharing, I remember well, the developments on the financial needs surveys. So I also extend a warm welcome to Bobby. Now from RURA, the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, we have the presence of Mrs. Arlette Ruakasina and Mr. James Musungigusi, who will also share their experience working in the rapid response surveys with I2I Finmark Trust. You are very, very welcome. And from the National Bank of Rwanda, we have also the honor to have Dr. Moise Bigirimana, Manager on Financial Inclusion and Consumer Protection and financial education. Dr. Birimana also is a member of AFI and is a member of the Global Standards Proportionality Working Group. And we have also the honor to have been working very closely with him in other previous developments. So welcome, Moise. Now, dear speakers, thank you for your participation and a warm welcome to all of you. Before we begin, allow me to share with you the main objectives of this webinar, which is the second part of 2 webinars about the demand-side surveys. First, one of the first objectives is to identify the main contributions and practical uses of financial measurement tools from the supply and from the demand side that complement face-to-face financial demand-side surveys. Also, is the continuation of last webinar. Second, to identify the way financial transactional data from the supply side allows to track the trends of the actual use of financial services with a detailed segmentation. So this is also will be shared by Isabel. And to share the experience of developing additional data sources from the demand side using SMS and telephone-based surveys to measure remotely specific aspects of financial and other social behaviors, providing valuable insights that are difficult to get through other means, especially in these times, no, where we have social distancing and so much health concerns. So finally, we will also have the opportunity to share the case study on Rwanda and also other experiences from countries like Nigeria and Mexico. The format will be, I will allow first the floor, I will give the floor to Isabel Carboni. She has prepared a presentation. And after that, we will have a session of, we will allow our guest speakers to have comments and additional remarks. And after that, we will have the presence of Mrs. Shirley Joffries. She has also a presentation on sustainable demand-side surveys. And then we will have also, after her presentation, a discussion with our guest speakers. And once this, we will open for a session of question and answers. We encourage you to use the Q&A icon that you have, and also the interpretation icon in case you want to listen to the conference, to the webinar in English, in Spanish, or in French. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you and welcome for joining to this webinar. And I want to give the floor now to Isabel Carboni with her presentation. Isabel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Luis, and greetings to all of you, whatever time of day it is where you are. It's a pleasure to be here on this webinar. Thank you, Luis. The first slide, please, Tati. Thank you. Insight to Impact has been working with AFI members in the Financial Inclusion Data Working Group for quite some time, working with different members to test out approaches and figure out, are there better ways to measure financial inclusion? Are there ways to be smarter with the data that we have already? So Insight to Impact was set up to improve the measurement of financial inclusion for a 5-year period. But during this time, financial inclusion itself has changed. There's been a huge growth, for example, in digital financial services, which changes the type of data that we can collect to measure inclusion. Using data analytics, we can look at supply-side data in new ways. Instead of just looking at aggregated figures of what is the total number of bank accounts or what is the total number of transactions, we can begin to look at that in more nuanced ways and look at how are different customer segments using different financial products. What is the volume of money or finances that they're spending in different ways? What are those use cases? How frequently are they using that? Next slide, please. We wanted to learn how we could begin to use transaction or supply side data alongside demand side data. And our first attempt was to try to look at supply side data in order to link it together with demand side data and try to understand those linkages, what worked well. But then as we began to use supply side data, we saw that it had value all by itself. So some of the benefits of using supply side data is that you get really large data sets of very up-to-date information on financial transactions. It's extremely accurate in most cases. There's always data cleaning needed, but you are not subject to the recall errors or responder biases that may come into demand side surveys, especially when we are trying to ask people about their specific financial behaviors. For example, how frequently have you used a digital financial service, or how much value of money have you used using a bank card or mobile money? It's difficult to remember those things. It's difficult to know how frequently you've done them and what different things you might have used those for. And these are the kinds of items that supply side data can tell us very well and very accurately the values and volumes by different products of how people are using financial services, or whether their account is just a postbox account that they just cash out on and there's actually no meaningful usage of that financial product. Additionally, the demographic variables that are available to us linked to bank accounts using the Know Your Customer data or KYC data tells us, are each of these users, are they men, are they women, what age group do they fall into, which region of the country do they live in? And this helps us to see where are the gaps in financial inclusion and where are the areas that are more strongly included, or when it comes to digital financial services, how they are digitizing. Next, please, Tati. However, there are limitations. We cannot get everything from supply side data. It cannot explain behaviors. This we need demand side surveys from. We can see what people are doing, but we don't know why they're doing it. We also don't get to see how much people are transacting in cash, how much people are saving at home or in informal mechanisms. Supply side data also cannot tell us so much about those who are excluded, simply because we don't have the data on them. It may also mask intra-household transactions, and by that I mean you might have one household member who is the owner of their account and transacts on behalf of the household, which may consist of different age groups, different genders, different generations, and we don't get to see that granularity if there is only one household member with their own account. We are also aware that in some cases the KYC data may be inaccurate. So, for example, there's cases with mobile money where perhaps the father in the household or the man in the household with the identification may register the SIM card, but then those SIM cards are passed on to other members of the household. So where we think it may be a middle-aged man transacting, it's actually a different member of the household. So some limitations to be aware of. Next slide, please. But we wanted to see what can we learn from supply side data. Given this data is collected anyway, it doesn't cost us so much to collect the data. The issues are with accessing it and privacy, but then we can jump straight into the analytics. Next slide, please. So our first, I'm going to present to you three key insights. The first insight here is usage and frequency and what we can learn from that. So as I mentioned, supply side data gives us that accurate data usage by product for all the different financial products a particular customer might have. Where there is good coding or good tagging of what those different expenditures represent, we're able to identify the different use cases that where people are transferring value or spending money. And it enables us, where there is that KYC data, to get a very customer-centric view. So not an aggregated figure of account, but how does that segment into different customer groups? Next slide, please. So firstly, these slides are to give you an example of the types of data that we were able to analyze using supply-side data. So this data here is from a commercial bank in Mexico that we analyzed in partnership with CNBV, the regulator in Mexico, to look at what can we learn about card usage for debit cards and for credit cards. So instead of just looking at the number of accounts, we were then able to look at how frequently is somebody using their card and what does that look like. So here we get a different picture where we can see a large number of weekly users with debit cards and a proportionally large number using credit cards on a monthly basis. So this gives us a much greater idea of the number of customers who are active users. And that looking at a 3-month band of usage doesn't tell us that much. Many surveys do look at 3 months as being active usage, but we can bring that down to weekly to see how are people meaningfully interacting and their usage on a weekly basis. Next slide, please. This data here is from Nigeria, from NIPS, and we were looking at NIP, the instant payment service that was launched. On the aggregated levels, the amounts being transacted via NIP, the instant payments on mobile phones, was very small. But when we took a unique customer view using the ID numbers, we were able to see a huge growth in the number of users transacting by NIP. Whereas if you look at it by value, you will see that POS and other types of payments are much higher. But what's interesting to us here is the number of customers who are included in this way using instant payments, even with small values, which shows that NIP was reaching to those customers who didn't have as many means. They were not such frequent users of their bank accounts or not so included in that way, but being able to use instant payments was very interesting. So this gives us a per customer view from supply side data. Next slide, please. Then we can also get a view of what are people paying for. And again, this slide here is from Mexico. We were able to look by people's online shopping habits and by their POS transactions. And although we couldn't get the very granular data, it was tagged well enough to understand, okay, this is something somebody's paid for travel, or this is petrol, this is medical or insurance, and we're able to break down those use cases to see where are people willing to use digital payments. On the other side, with our demand side surveys, we looked at where people are using cash. But here we get a very accurate view of what is coming on. And what's interesting to see here is that the majority of the online transactions are major US-based platforms rather than domestic digital services. Next slide, please, Tati. We were also very surprised to find different results between demand side surveys and supply side surveys. Now, just a warning to you here, this is a very small sample size. You will see in the bottom right-hand corner, there were a very small number of people within the data who we were able to link. That means they had a bank account with the commercial bank in Mexico that we were working with, and they were also willing to be interviewed and gave us permission to link the data. So that was a very small number. Much of that was due to poor data held by the bank for phone numbers that were out of date, people who were no longer customers, so it was quite tricky to do. We ended up with a small sample size. However, we have seen this mirrored again with other products and in other countries as well. So do bear that in mind. So what we are showing you here is that using supply side and demand side survey in a complementary way, we see some contradictions here. So we can see that of our 100% of debit card users, 78% of them in the bank data used a non-ATM channel. That means they were actively paying for something with that rather than just cashing out. But when we compared that, the same people in the survey, only 50% of them reported using their debit card, having a debit card. And an even smaller percent, only 22% reported actually using that debit card. So we see some quite vast differences here in the data, whether people are not willing to share, whether people feel uncomfortable with sharing their financial information. We don't know exactly, but there are some contradictions in the data. Next slide, please. On to our second insight, which is really being able to look deeply into which use cases are digitizing. Now, we saw a few examples from Mexico earlier on how people are using POS and online purchases. And now we're going to look at our other information from Rwanda. Next slide, please. So using mobile money data in Rwanda, we were able to analyze the frequency with which people used mobile money, the values they were using, but particularly of interest here was the use cases. So when are people using mobile money rather than cash or other ways to transact? And we can see airtime and P2P transfers are major use cases for mobile money. We can see that replicated in many countries, particularly throughout Africa. But here we can see, interestingly, that electricity payments are coming up as a driver of mobile money payments, that people are using an easy interface that's convenient to them for paying their electricity. The next one down that I want to draw your attention to is the merchant payments through one particular product called Momo Pay that has grown in popularity since its launch. And seeing that coming on as a main use case. And this is an in-person merchant payment that you can make in a store, but you make a payment in a way similar to a P2P transfer using USSD codes to make that payment. Next slide, please, Tati. To give you a sense of the growth, I wanted to show particularly on utility payments. I think this is of particular interest in our focuses on e-government payments and other utility payments for customers in country. And here we can see from January in 2018 through to August in 2019, how those users have grown. And even though you have the electricity at the top in blue, and then at the bottom we have the water payments in yellow. And although the water payments are much lower, they have also almost doubled during that period of time. That's shown, and the year-on-year growth for electricity has been 43%. So we see some significant growth in this that is available to us by looking at this supply side data on digitization. Next slide, please. The third insight to share with you is that by using supply side data, we can identify some excluded groups. Although we are not able to see how excluded groups are transacting because they don't appear in the data, the granularity that we can get from supply side data blended with KYC data does help us to see, when we map that against the adult populations, we map that against overall users of a particular product like mobile money, we can see what's their behaviors, who uses mobile money in different ways. How do women use mobile money? How do different age groups or people in different locations use mobile money? Next slide, please. So here we looked firstly at the what we call digital payments diversity. So how many different products or use cases are there for mobile money that are being actively used? So on the left-hand side, what you'll see is the median value of credit transactions going up. So how much people are spending. Then across the bottom, you'll see the different types of payments people are making. So for this purpose, we counted some things as no activity, because they were a cash in and cash out, or they were only receiving a P2P and cashing out immediately. So you can see the 3 bubbles here of 3 segments, which I'll show you in more detail in a moment, who did not have any activity beyond receiving P2P and cashing in and out. Then as we move to the right, we can see that there are 2 quite large groups with low levels of diversity. So most of these people, they're buying airtime, or they're sending a P2P or receiving a P2P as well. Then as we move to the right, we see the medium diversity. They've made at least 3 payments, which we can pick up from the supply side data. That means they've moved beyond airtime and P2P. So perhaps they're making an electricity payment or a water payment, or they're making a merchant payment using a digital means. And then the highest bubble on the right-hand side, we see a high diversity group. So this group of people are using a significant number of payments within a given period. So they may be doing multiple different types of digital transactions. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of the kind of granularity we can go into, and again, this data is from Rwanda in this section, we can then break that down for those different digital diversity groups you just saw mapped out. What proportion of those are women? And which proportion live in the different districts? So the supply side data can give us very accurate information about how people are transacting, but also be able to tell us the gender and where those people live. That can help us understand how policies are working for inclusion, particularly with regards to gender and particularly with regards to areas outside of our major cities. Next slide, please. So just some closing thoughts for you. How could you use supply side data in your own context? Where is the ownership or access to that data? Do your central banks collect that data in a data warehouse? What type of data is available? How is it stored and coded? Because that really matters if you want to do more granular analysis to understand, can you see the different use cases? Do you require all the KYC data to be recorded so that you can understand how your policies are working and how behavior is changing? Next slide, please. And finally, just to conclude, in using supply-side data for policy making, you can get the accurate frequency and values to measure financial inclusion and usage. It can give you insights on different payments behavior and can track digitization of certain use cases. And when we add KYC data into this, we can begin to address gender and location gaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. This was a very enlightening presentation. You know how, and I think it's becoming more clear the advantage of the supply side data, the advantage and the usage of supply side data, and how can this also drive policy, especially I think the supply side data can help policymakers to understand how is the ecosystem functioning, what are the main channels that are being used, what are the main devices, what is the objective of using this. So it's really, really, and I also I think it was also very clear the relationship between the supply side data and the demand side data, no? which also is very important and which also provides a lot of insights to understand what is the perception, the motivation from the users of financial services, but also from the potential users. So, thank you. I want to open now for further remarks from our guest speakers. I don't know if you want to contribute to, for instance, on the experience from Rwanda on extracting the data, Dr. Moise, or also on the use on the cybersecurity side from this data, Mr. James or Ms. Arlette.
Yeah, thank you, Luis, for the floor. Thank you, Isabel, for a wonderful presentation on supply side data, and thanks for having mentioned the comparison between supply side data and demand side data. Actually, first, I think that it's quite important first to understand why we want this data. It's for decision making, policy making, and making good policies or taking the right decision requires having the right and timely information on hand. So the use of supply side data, I may say that it has advantages, especially for countries where the level of financial inclusion is high. I mean, the form of financial inclusion, because in that case, you'll be able to have data available. There is something that Isabel mentioned, which I feel I should have emphasis on. It's the issue of supply side data, where the excluded will still always be excluded. You will not be able to track any information on the excluded. So that's how the complementarity of demand side data and supply side data comes in. So as far as our case is concerned, maybe back to our case, Rwanda. What I2I has done has shown us that potential that we have in availability of data can be exploited, and we have already started the process of engaging I2I, trying to measure the level of financial inclusion based on the supply side data, and probably in the future we'll be here discussing what we found in our electronic data warehouse. Maybe as a small experience on what you can track on using supply side data, just as an emphasis of what Isabel mentioned. In our electronic data warehouse, we are able to track the account information and the customer information, and these are linked through the national ID. And these information are collected from both banks, MFIs, SACCOs, and we can get some information from for MNOs. So using this information, we believe that we can at least know the level of financial inclusion, which is exact. I mean exact because the main source of level of financial inclusion mainly is the FinScope. If I talk about the case of Rwanda, the main source is FinScope, which comes after many years. After 4 years, imagine if you are to take a decision, or if you have to make a policy and you wait for the information after a year or after 2 years, it becomes somehow difficult to make the right decision. But using supply side data, then we are able to have the information at least on a monthly basis or even on a daily basis. So that brings us to the point of saying that financial inclusion data will be tracked, but only when we have the combination and we explore the benefits of both supply side and demand side. I don't want to be a pro of either demand side or supply side, because each one has its own advantages over the other one, and each jurisdiction might have its level of financial inclusion or even availability of data, which might be different. And supply side data also is not easy to correct because it requires some infrastructure to have the information, and having the ability to analyze the information. So I think that both, that's my understanding, both supply side data and demand side data are quite useful if we are to make the right decision for financial inclusion and for better life of people in our countries. Yeah, thank you. I think that if I may add something more, but let me just not take too much time and give the floor to my colleagues for complimenting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Birimana. It was really, and your remarks remind me of mentioning on the importance of having the national IDs and to link this with the data, and also what Isabel mentioned on the KYC data that allows to have more granularity and more segmentation of the supply side data. I think that's I know, and we know that it implies a lot of challenges, but once you overcome those challenges, this data, I think, can provide a very valuable vision, right, of this. I want to invite our other guest speakers if you want to intervene at this moment, or I will give the floor to Shirley. Arlette or James, do you have any remarks, or we can wait for the next session?
Thank you, Louis. And sorry, I will not be able to switch on my video, some connectivity issues. Just to mention that from the rural context, we are the regulators of the telecom companies. And as the regulators of telecom companies, we needed to have visibility of one of their main business, that is mobile money. And on top of that, we also kind of mandated to look into consumer protection, and we are also very much interested in the whole journey of data analytics, and as Moise said, to help us having informed decision and making. So it was a very interesting journey we had with Eye to Eye, and very informative, especially on collecting data, on anonymizing data. I think Isabel mentioned something on anonymizing, which is very key. So we were very happy with the findings, and of course, we also learned a lot from supply side data. That is an approach we haven't had in our previous work around data analytics. Yeah, so it was quite informative on our side of technology regulator, and working hand in hand with the central bank. There is a lot of insights we got from eye-to-eye study, and it will also help us to quickly initiate another analysis when the current crisis of COVID-19 started, and we could come up with very good findings, and we having worked with eye-to-eye just previous to the crisis helped us take timely decisions. Wanted just to mention how this approach of supply side data has given us a picture that we didn't have before, not only on the consumer behavior when it comes to transactions, but also on frauds. We had a lot of more visibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arlette. Thank you for sharing this. And this also, I think, this also reminds us on the importance of the collaboration, or the collaborative approach. You know, that data is a language that everybody, it's a language that link everyone, right? Because everybody may understand the same with the data. So it's also, I think it's also a very good lesson on the collaborative approach between RURA and the National Bank of Rwanda, and also with eye-to-eye to have these insights. And also the point on the security, right? On the privacy of data in one hand, that it involves part of the challenges on having this amount of data. You have the benefit, but also you have the responsibility, right, to treat this data with the right care, right, anonymation of the data, and also how can this be used for consumer protection and for prevention of fraud or fraud schemes and other issues is really important. So thank you. Now I think we will go to the next session. We invite Ms. Shirley Joffries on this other very interesting and compelling section of today's webinar on sustainable demand side surveys. Shirley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Louise. So yes, thanks very much to my colleagues here for a really interesting presentation by Isabel on the use of supply and demand side data together. I think that's really important and key. And I'm going to now just take you through some of the work that we've been doing on demand side data collection at eye-to-eye to really make it more sustainable. And I think that some of the comments from the panel are actually really relevant to this, because as was mentioned, something like a FinScope survey is very useful, and it provides us with a lot of depth and information and can get us to a real understanding of the unbanked. However, it is something that is very logistically difficult to implement. It requires a lot of manpower and time. And what that means is that it can only be done infrequently. Only very lucky countries can even do it annually. So it's not the kind of thing that can give you data on a regular basis to be making decisions regularly. It can give you a very good depth understanding of your market, the people that are in the market, but there is a challenge in that something like FinScope not only costs a lot, but it also takes a very long time to implement. So we actually set out with that kind of problem in mind, and we're trying to figure out ways to develop sustainable data collection methods. And the real questions we were asking ourselves was, how do we reduce the cost of collecting indicators from survey data? And then how can we use multiple methods together to get the benefits of all of them together to really help us achieve this? And that kind of combination is really about getting the right balance between the cost of demand-side surveys, but then also making sure that the data collected is still accurate and precise enough for indicators. So Isabel's use case was actually a really good use case where they used telephone numbers from the supply side lists. So you know that the people that you're talking to are the people you're trying to reach. You know that we want to be talking to people from this particular list, but often we want to actually understand a nationally representative audience. And so our challenge was really to think about how do we do that. Can we move to the next slide, please? So we set off with an idea of using SMS surveys. That's text messages where the survey really works by the question is in the SMS, and that's the whole question, and the person who receives the SMS responds by SMS, and that triggers the next question. So it's really like a SMS conversation because the use of SMS surveys is very affordable. Typically, a face-to-face demand-side survey can cost around $50 to complete, whereas a SMS survey can cost about $5 to complete. So it's a very, very affordable method, but it obviously has some limitations. The most obvious of which is that you have to have a mobile phone. And then in addition to that, you also need to be literate enough to be comfortable with the self-complete survey. So we know, working in development, that the people we're actually the most interested in are likely to be the people that are going to be excluded. So we also thought to use telephonic interviewing, where an interviewer actually phones the person and talks to them over the phone. And that's the method that was used by Isabel and her team in the RURA work with the RURA. So we wanted to see what kind of difference does it make having CATI interviews, or sorry, telephonic interviews, I use the jargon CATI. What improvement would we have in our sample with that? But we still knew we would only reach people with mobile phones. So we decided to also include some face-to-face collected data to really think about and make sure that we're reaching people from all spectrums of the population. Now, there's obviously some additional challenges to that, because when you mix different survey methods, people also answer the questions slightly differently. So, for example, if you're asking somebody about how much food they've had in the last, or if they've skipped meals in the last week, face-to-face, they might be shy to say, oh, I have actually skipped a meal, to an interviewer. And even on a telephone interview, they might be a little bit more shy to actually say that. Whereas on an SMS, it's very anonymous, so you're likely to see slightly different answers on different kinds of questions. So we needed to take into account that we're using a skewed sample from the SMS or CATI interviews. We are supplementing that with face-to-face interviews, but there's also a kind of mode effect. So what we did is we used a modeling approach, a statistical modeling approach called multi-level regression and post-stratification. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I'm not actually the statistician that did it, but it's been used in polling work quite successfully in the US, using telephonic surveys to predict sort of presidential election outcomes, and it's been done quite successfully. And we decided, let's see what we could do with that. So if we move to the next slide, I can really demonstrate actually how effective it was. So on this slide, you'll see a whole lot of bars. Don't worry too much about each of them. I'm going to explain them as we go through. And I'm just using 3 indicators from our survey. The very first bar on the left-hand side of your screen, the sort of deeper blue bar, is a face-to-face nationally representative survey benchmark. So that's the kind of figure we're trying to match with our more affordable data collection method. Then the next bar, the dark gray bar, is using just the SMS data collection tool. So no telephonic, no face-to-face included. And you can see that the responses are very different across those two samples. So SMS certainly skews to a much higher digitally financially included audience. And I'm sure that you're not surprised by that, because that's, you know, people who have a mobile phone and are comfortable with SMS are also going to be more likely to be digitally financially included. Then the third bar is when we apply the multi-level regression and post-stratification model just to the SMS sample. And with that, you can see there's some improvement, particularly on the third indicator there, we get actually a really good result, but it's not enough of an improvement. We're still quite far out using our predictive modeling. So then the next two bars are actually the really interesting ones, where we included some face-to-face surveys in them. And the one of them, we only used 150 face-to-face surveys, and another test we used 300 face-to-face surveys. And you can see there that including that small face-to-face sample actually makes a big impact to the modeling, and we really do replicate the nationally representative survey results very well. So we can move on to the next slide. So we're quite excited about that work, and we are going to be publishing detail on the actual work that we've done on mixed methods. But one of the outcomes of this has actually been, in the current global condition that we're all faced with now with COVID-19, the learnings that we've had from what we've been doing and developing over the last few years have really helped us to approach collecting data in a time of crisis. So we have actually launched a COVID-19 tracker in 7 countries in Africa. And we're tracking the data every few weeks. We're doing surveys in each of these countries, and we're reporting on that data, and it is available on the I2I website. So you can actually go and access the data. It's free for use and download, and we are working with our partners in currently Nigeria and Kenya, mainly because that's where we have data available, but we are expanding it to Uganda very soon, and Rwanda. We also are going to be launching data very soon. So the data is there for use and for your interest if you want to have a look, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we did slightly differently for COVID-19, because there are certain things that we can't do with the way that we've been trying to with the mixed methods. So you can move to the next slide. So I mentioned the kind of limitations of SMS earlier, but I actually think a bigger problem at the moment is that we can't do face-to-face research. So it's not socially responsible to be sending field workers out into the field in the time of a pandemic. So face-to-face fieldwork currently is actually off the cards. And so what we decided to do was to use telephonic interviewing specifically for our COVID-19 surveys. And the reason we did that is because we don't have the benefit of that face-to-face to make our sample more representative. And SMS, while it's cheaper than telephonic, it doesn't give us as wide an audience because it limits us to only people who are literate enough to take part. So we moved forward with it using telephonic interviews. And I'm just going to, if you move to the next slide, please, show you that we don't need to be completely concerned about using telephonic interviews and not having any face-to-face surveys, because we do actually, with mobile surveys, SMS and telephonic interviews, we do actually reach people who are sometimes we would think are going to be very low in their representation there. You would think it's going to skew to a very high income sample, but it might not necessarily. So this data here is from our pilots that we've been doing on the mixed methodology, and it shows how many people in each of the markets we went to who are living below the poverty line we actually managed to reach with each method. And you'll see some of them we actually over-sampled on that, but on all of those methods we do quite well. But then what's really important about why telephonic is important, if you can go to the next, just sort of hit forward, Tati, thanks. Yeah. Looking specifically just as Kenya as an example, you can see the SMS data for low literacy there. We really don't get people who self-report as not being very literate. whereas on the telephonic interviews, we actually get a good representation there. So that's why we felt telephone interviews were the best option. And then you can go to the next slide. But of course, we've lost the benefit that we had of having a face-to-face sample to put into our data. So we really needed to think very carefully about how do we account for that? What do we do about that? So with telephonic interviews, you can follow a probability sampling approach, but it's actually probably not the best approach to take, because when you use, you can randomly select numbers from every valid number in the market. But when you do that, you're going to naturally skew your sample to those people who are more likely to have a mobile phone. So in most developing countries, you're going to have more men in your sample, you're going to have more urban people in your sample, and you're going to be underrepresenting on poorer rural women. And so, but we know from the data that I've just shown you that we do actually reach those people using the mobile phones, but we might underreach them. And so, what I recommend for telephonic surveys is actually to use what's called a quota sampling approach, where you actually specify certain types of people that you want to get in the right proportions in your sample. And then you weight your data afterwards to be nationally representative. And in this case, we're doing weighting using 2 different methods. And currently the data that's available is using what's called rake weighting, but we are also applying that multi-level regression and post-stratification to our data to see if it gives us a better ultimate result. And then just some final thoughts for the group here in terms of what you can take from this. It's really important to think about mobile surveys as something that can actually be useful for any topic, but they can't provide that same level of depth that a full face-to-face demand-side survey would give. So when we are able to responsibly do face-to-face surveys, there's still a huge amount of value in the level of depth you can get there. Mobile surveys have to be short by their nature, and so you can't get that same level of information. And so they probably work better if you have a specific topic in mind that you want to focus on, or if you have sort of high-level indicators that you want to be able to track over time. And then it's just also really important to think about your planning going into your survey design. You know, really thinking about what is it that you want to be doing, who are you trying to represent, and when you know the answers to those questions, you can really think about how do you design a mobile survey that's best fit for purpose. So in the case of Isabel's work, we knew we wanted to be talking to the same people as we had supply side data for. So that was quite an easy way to design our sample. You simply use those numbers. But then for work, the COVID-19 work, we really want to be doing a representative sample. So we really have to plan our sampling very carefully and really monitor and keep track of it to make sure that we are getting to those people who are likely to be underrepresented. But that you may also have use cases where you want to get to the mobile universe, and that will be easier, and you don't necessarily need to include a face-to-face survey sample or to worry as much about how you are going to design your sample. You could actually probably use a good probability sampling approach if that's what you're trying to do. Yeah, so that's essentially what I have to share with you today.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much, Shirley. Thank you. I think it was also very enlightening. You know, honestly, from my side, some years ago, you know, in another life, I was at the central bank, and when I read about these CATI surveys, especially in the US, using telephones, and you know, I in my mind, I thought that this is for rich countries. This is not applicable in my country. I'm from Mexico. This cannot, you know, if I want to have a track on financial I don't know, financial inclusion, or I don't see how can this apply in my country. If, you know, my telephone the telephone, the people with telephones in my country is very limited. So, but now with looking at the statistical approach that you have developed, for an instance, and also the fact that now the use of mobile phones is very, mobile phones and other, especially mobile phones, is very widespread in our countries. Now, I think my vision has totally changed, and I think especially for these circumstances when it's very difficult to approach, to measure or to have like take the pulse, right, and see how it is, some emergency policies are being implemented. And not only on COVID-19, I can think about, natural disasters. I think this tool can really work if it's well implemented, right? Well organized in terms of the statistical approach that you developed. In terms of also, I think you need to customize the questions because it's not the same face-to-face interview from a telephone interview or an SMS interview. So, well, thank you so much. I think this is very useful. If you want to comment, and also I want to open the floor to our guest speakers. We have Grant Robertson, and also we have our colleagues from RURA and from National Bank of Rwanda who have been also experiencing on this. So please, I want to open the floor before we go to the Q&A. Who wants to interview first? Maybe Grant?
Hi, yes, Lou, thank you. I think just briefly, I think from our side, what is needed when you use mobile-based data collection technologies is a change in paradigm, research paradigm. And we need to accept that these kinds of methodologies aren't pure probability-based methodologies and won't give us the estimates that you would get from a face-to-face survey. And I think we need to use that as our starting point when designing these surveys. And that then feeds into how we interpret the results. And I think it's important when using these types of methodologies that we focus more on the trends and the direction of the data, more so than the exact point estimates, because you don't have precise confidence intervals like you would in a probability survey. So I think that necessitates a change in your research paradigm, and you need to go into these surveys knowing that you're not going to have, in some cases, confidence intervals that are very precise or very narrow, and we just need to accept that. But I think the data is still very useful in terms of formulating policy, developing rapid response initiatives, like we're seeing with COVID at the moment, because the data gives us at least a sense of direction and can point us in the right direction to formulate something that's appropriate to respond to. So I think it's just important to note that paradigm shifts are required when using these types of research methodologies.
Thank you so much, Grant. This is totally agree, and I think this sums into what we have been seeing right now, for instance, on COVID-19. And I personally have been looking at the track that you have developed, and it's really amazing how you can look at some trends and some the policy responses, right? That sometimes you don't know how to get this data if you are in the office, right? Making policy. Thank you. I don't know if you want somebody else who would like to share before opening to Q&A. Maybe we can go open to Q&A and allow our speakers to respond. So Tati, we have some questions that at least I see one question, or I was looking at one question.
Yes, we have a question from Mr. J. Brown. His question is, are there simple tools or templates for data collection and analysis available that any of the panelists can share?
I think just from our side, what we tend to use is research houses that have these technology capabilities. We don't focus on data collection per se, and we haven't built an infrastructure to do that. So it's often cheaper just to outsource the data collection to a research house that has the existing infrastructure to conduct SMS surveys or telephonic surveys. And then on the analysis side, I think a lot of research houses also have the right tools to generate tables appropriately and quickly, as well as charts. And I know Shirley and Bobby have been working on a lot of automation on our side to try and generate the results much faster and much more efficiently. But there aren't really off-the-shelf tools that I can recommend that are simple and easy to use. So you're probably best to engage research houses to do that for you.
This is Isabel.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, Isabel. Over to
Just
you.
to remind everybody about the Insight to Impact Toolkit that is available on the website. And we hope to be also putting some of that out onto the AFI website as well to make it more easily available to everybody. The toolkit has information to support both developing demand-side surveys and also on transactional data as well. So in the section on Analyze, you will see there's actually a downloadable PDF for support around transactional data analysis as well. So please do take a look at the toolkit. There's several downloadable resources there to support you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you. Indeed, I think it's a very good resource, and also I think there's a need to customize especially on an SMS survey. I think it's for any kind of data collection tool. It's I think there's no one size fits all. You need to customize it to your policy needs, to the circumstances where you are designing this. If it's something for instance, if you want to measure the impact of a financial inclusion strategy, you may opt for a full-fledged demand-side survey, right? To put together and to collect the necessary indicators to evaluate or to monitor evaluate some instances of the policies already implemented or to be implemented. And if you have another policy objective that it's more you need to act fast in an emergency, as in the case of right now, we are living all this COVID-19, where there are movement restrictions. There is a need to provide liquidity to many sectors, many people, and sometimes you don't have the data. You don't know if this aid, if you are providing some aid or some loan program, if this is really reaching the right people, right? So I think depending on the circumstances, it needs to be designed and tailored. Even the questionnaire and the methodology to be implemented. So one question that I would like to ask, and I don't know any of the speakers, is how to connect, for instance, connecting these tools that we have seen. You have the supply side data, using transactional data, and going more in depth using, for instance, the KYC to get more granularity and more segmentation and to have more context of the data, for instance. And then you have the full-fledged demand-side surveys that are very useful and provide, as mentioned by Dr. Moise, provide the insights of the people that it's unserved or partially served financially, and also these tools, right, to look and have a rapid response and have an insight pretty quickly. and with a very accurate, level. So how would you, I don't know if somebody wants to link all of this into, into the discussion.
Hi, Louise, it's Grant again. If I'm understanding your question correctly, what we've been thinking about at the RTR facility is fusion as well. So it's quite possible that you can fuse transactional data with survey data, provided you have the right links set up between the two data sets. And by statistically fusing these two data sets, you can get a much richer picture of what's happening in a particular market. And we are hoping to do a small fusion exercise ourselves with some gender data we've collected on a project that Bobby's actually working on with other survey data. So we're going to be experimenting with the fusion techniques, but it's logically possible to extend that fusion from a demand-side data set into a supply-side data set and create a single data set that provides a much more enriched picture of a particular market and consumer behavior in general. So that's something that we're going to be looking at, and I think it's something that the financial inclusion practitioners need to look at quite seriously. It's been done extensively in the media research world, and it's been done very well and very effectively, and it's done two things: saved a lot of money on data collection, and created very rich data sets around how people consume media. And I think it's entirely possible that we get the same result with financial inclusion and financial data. So I think that's something that the market needs to adopt and experiment with and then employ on a large scale.
Okay, no,
Louise, this is Isabel. Yes. To also add to that, we haven't released the findings yet, but as part of the mobile money analysis in Rwanda, we decided to add on a small CATI survey that Shirley and I partnered on to do, where we contacted 1,000 subscribers of mobile money in Rwanda to get an understanding of who they are, how they receive money, what kind of employment they're in, and also to ask them questions around financial health. And we asked as part of that to get their consent to link their responses to their mobile money data. And we were delighted to find over 90% of people agreed to that. So we've just finished doing that now. So we have the analysis already on financial health from that, but now this process of linking, what were the levels of financial health? What can we understand about the people who responded? And how does that link to the actual behavior that we saw in the data? So that's going to be coming out soon, hopefully. We've been a bit sidetracked by the COVID-19 work, but that is another piece where we took transaction data and we complemented it with some aspects of demand-side survey as well. So I think it can work both ways. You can have a demand-side survey complemented by supply-side data, or you can have supply-side data complemented with some demand-side survey.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Well, I think we all agree on this approach. Yes? This is the problem.
Yeah. Thank you. This is Moise. What Isabel mentioned on the complementarity of both supply-side data and demand-side data is actually, as I said earlier, quite informing. Because each type of data has its own limitations, and another one has its own advantages over the other one. So that complementarity, if the main issue is how easy it can be to have this kind of complementarity between supply side and demand side. as Isabel mentioned in her presentation, she was like, supply side data, you can get a big sample size. And because it's just the existing data that you can analyze. But for demand side survey, sometimes the possibility of having that big sample is a challenge. So matching the two and having this fusion that is being talked about, it will be quite useful. But again, I look at it in terms of this kind of complementarity. How scientific is it if to have the comparison of samples that are totally different? Of course, for decision-making purposes, it can be done, and for policy making, but this challenge of sample, how can we eliminate it? And again, what Shire was talking about on literacy, especially for some respondents, it might be difficult. And these methodologies again come with some challenges. If I put more emphasis and focus on the excluded, this, I may say that in most of the cases, there are some researches that show that those people who are excluded are likely to be even illiterate, and sometimes it becomes challenging for these new methodologies, as Ruiz was saying, that he was thinking that CAT surveys are designed for the developed countries, and I have the same thought, like for the most vulnerable, for the informal sector, for the excluded, I'm like, is it easy for these new methodologies to be applied on them? Because these are the ones that cannot be reached easily through demand side, through supply side survey, and likely to be reached or somehow difficult to be reached using the other methodologies. Like if you use telephonic interviews, if you use call, some of those people don't have even devices. So it becomes tricky, and it's still tricky for this to be applied, especially for the excluded people. But in any case, the complementarity between both supply side analysis and demand side analysis is what policymakers need to have the right information on hand for decision making.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moise. This is very insightful, no? The complementarity of data and how can we use? Yes, please, Tati.
Yes, Bobby, who works with Shirley, I think would like to speak. Is that fine?
Yes, please.
Bobby?
Bobby, please.
Thanks very much, Tati, Luis, and James, for that those good questions and points, and to everybody. It's good to be speaking to everyone today. I think, I mean, I completely agree with James, and I think that Isabel's presentation made it quite clear that the data needs to be fit for purpose, and yeah, for a lot of the transactional data, it's good to define, it's helpful for everybody to define who the audiences are, and for the segmentation to indicate the universe that's being spoken to. In terms of the limitations of the sampling for getting to those marginalized people that are much harder to get to, that's why we actually went with this other modeling approach to weighting called multi-level regression and post-stratification. The whole way that this statistical approach works is that it borrows strength across a whole number of different dimensions in terms of which people are classified. So it's not always possible to get to all the different kinds of marginalized people, but by looking at the different dimensions of their identities, it's possible to borrow strength across these different dimensions to build up a picture of these people that are very hard to reach. And the technique also applies appropriate statistical interval work to make sure that the estimates have the appropriate margins of error and intervals to do responsible reporting. So James is highlighting a really difficult aspect, particularly using mobile phones, and that's why looking to political science and sort of their cutting edge approaches to getting the voice of those people that are much harder to reach is the kind of work that we've been looking to do to address these really challenging issues that you all are right to highlight.
Thank you so much, Bobby. Thank you for these remarks. I think very useful. And we have a question from James Rwagasana, Mr. James from National Bank of Rwanda, from our working group, and he's asking on the demand side surveys, how long should they stay in use, the results? No, some countries have surveys that are carried out after every 3 to 5 years. So, which is if there is any, for instance, especially with we have our speakers from FIDWG Trust. What is your view on this?
Grant or Bobby, I think you would be best placed to answer this question.
I think it depends on the survey. The COVID survey we're reporting every 3 weeks, and so that's a demand side survey. So I mean, I think that was Shirley's point in her presentation, is that making sure that the surveys are designed in terms of being fit for purpose. The FinScope surveys have a very rigorous approach to, and those nationally representative demand side surveys, to getting everything in order and to making sure that the questionnaire design is fully consultative in terms of stakeholders. But sometimes, like with the current pandemic, we need to respond very quickly, and in that case, we make decisions and collect data much faster. So the interviewing of the COVID survey is now every 3 weeks, and a lot of the automation work that Grant mentioned means that we will probably be able to report 1 week after fieldwork ends for the next few waves going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bobby. I don't know if there's any further questions. I would like to invite our speakers to have a final remark, if you want, just before concluding.
Just one last comment from me. We will be continuing to explore work with transaction data and see what can we learn from this for financial inclusion and understanding usage of financial inclusion and digitization, both for policymaking and regulation, particularly as financial inclusion increases and grows and there's more data or better quality data available for this. So if you are interested in finding out more, please do feel free to get in touch. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Isabel.
Yes, I'd like to second Isabel's sentiments. We will definitely be continuing our development on this work going forward, and if you have any interest, please do feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Moise and James, would you like to bring, Arlette, of course, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Luis, and thank you, panelists, for the highlights and insightful information. As legislators, what we all struggle to get is the information from data, of course, that can support us advancing financial inclusion and going forward, reaching the financial health of our citizens. So whatever methodology that's coming up, we'll all try our best to make use of them. And thanks, Afi, for the partnership and the open discussion that you bring forward, and the support for in-country implementation that you have, especially for data in our case. So this is something quite helpful for us, and we should be making use. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Virimana. And please, if Arlette or James, or both, would like to make a final remark.
James from Rura had to excuse himself. So, Ms. Arlette, if you have some final remarks.
Well, I would just, first of all, I want to thank all of our speakers today, to each one of you on behalf of AFI. I think you provided a very good insight on the different uses of data, and especially, on the how can the supply side data provide even more, policy guidance, in terms of and the different challenges, but also the advantages of it, and the importance of the collaboration, the collaborative approach between between different regulators on sharing data, and the importance of defining the key objectives, and also finally I think the use of alternative methods, right? As this CATI and SMS surveys that can provide a very good, provide very good insights and enable the policy decision maker with more evidence. I think it's very important. So I want to thank all of you, and also from the data working group perspective, this also encourages us to go deeper in each one of these themes, thematic areas. And on the supply side, I think it's very important to go deeper on the data analysis, on how we get advantage also of, for instance, the sources as the KYC and other tools that we could get from the demand side surveys, from the supply side, to enable a more granularity and segmentation of the data, and also the use of, and we also, I think, in the next few months, I think we will be encouraged to get use also of these other tools, specifically the ones that are being used for the COVID-19 tracker, to explore more the possibilities that we can use and can adapt to our policy objectives, policy needs. So without further thing to say, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank also the events team and the translators for the valuable service. And I want to encourage you to keep on, let's keep the communication, and I think for the data working group, I think we will be open to go more in depth in these thematic areas in the upcoming weeks and months. So without further ado, I want to thank you and wish you to stay home and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.